This video provides a brief overview and general information on respiratory hazards in construction and respiratory protection program requirements. The Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also called OSHA, and state OSHA agencies require employers to have respiratory protection programs if their workers are required to wear respirators on the job. This video can be a part of the OSHA required respiratory protection training, which includes many topics, like how to put on and take off a respirator and how to use, clean, and maintain your respirator. Your employer must also provide you with worksite-specific training. While this video discusses some of your employer's responsibilities under OSHA's respiratory protection standard, it is important to remember that the purpose of a respirator is to protect your health and safety. Gases, dusts, mists, and fumes may be present at construction work sites. Some of these can make you sick or kill you if you breathe them in. These gases, dusts, mists, and fumes are referred to as respiratory hazards. Some respiratory hazards act quickly, like carbon monoxide, which can make you unconscious or kill you in minutes. Other respiratory hazards can take years to make you sick, like asbestos, which can cause lung cancer decades after you breathe it in. More examples of respiratory hazards in construction include lead dust and fumes from grinding, welding, cutting, or brazing surfaces coated with lead-based paint. Silica dust from cutting concrete or sandblasting. Solvent vapors from adhesives, paints, strippers, cleaning solvents, and spray coatings. And isocyanate vapors from spray foam insulation and certain spray paints or coatings. When there are respiratory hazards at your job site, your employer must use several methods to reduce your exposure to them, including engineering controls, such as local exhaust ventilation, work practice controls, such as using wet cutting techniques, and administrative controls, such as minimizing the number of workers exposed to the hazard. When you and your coworkers cannot be adequately protected from respiratory hazards through use of these methods, then your employer must provide you with an appropriate respirator to protect your health. Respiratory protection must be selected based on the hazard you will be exposed to on the job. Not every respirator will protect you against every hazard, so it's important for your employer to select the right one. For example, filtering face piece respirators may protect you against particulate hazards such as dusts. However, a filtering face piece respirator will not protect you against gas and vapor hazards like solvent vapors. If you are exposed to gases and vapors, you will need a different type of respirator. For example, you could use an air purifying respirator with chemical cartridges or an atmosphere supplying respirator, such as an airline respirator or self-contained breathing apparatus. In addition, atmosphere supplying respirators are the only respirators that will protect you against hazardous atmospheres, such as carbon monoxide and lack of oxygen. Selecting an appropriate respirator is your employer's responsibility. When respirators must be used on your job site, your employer must have a respiratory protection program. This program must meet the requirements of either the federal OSHA or your state OSHA respiratory protection standard. The standard requires your employer to do the following: develop and implement a written respiratory protection program. Evaluate the respiratory hazards in the workplace. Select and provide appropriate respirators. Provide worker medical evaluations and respirator fit testing. Provide for the maintenance, storage, and cleaning of respirators. Provide worker training about respiratory hazards and proper respirator use. Evaluate workers' use of respirators and correct any problems. And provide you with access to specific records and documents, such as a written copy of your employer's respiratory protection program. Some of these requirements, such as training and fit testing, can be provided by an outside party, including a union, an apprenticeship program, a contractors association, or a past employer, provided they were conducted within the last 12 months. However, it is still your current employer's responsibility to ensure that all of the requirements of the standard have been met. Because each workplace is different, it is very important that your employer's respiratory protection program address the conditions found in your specific workplace. For example, workplaces may differ in the following ways: the types and amount of respiratory hazards present, the people who manage the program, the policies and procedures for tasks such as respirator selection, maintenance, and use, and other methods for controlling exposure, such as using wet cutting techniques to reduce airborne dusts. Since construction work settings change over time, the written program must be updated as necessary to account for those changes in workplace conditions that affect respirator use. For example, changes in workplace conditions could include new work processes or techniques, such as introducing sandblasting into an area, the use of new or different building materials or chemicals, changes in the amount of a respiratory hazard in the workplace, or changes in the types of respirators being used. Notify your supervisor if something changes in your workplace that conflicts with or may not be covered by your respirator training or established workplace policies or procedures. Your employer's respiratory protection program must be managed by a qualified, trained program administrator. This person must monitor the program and make sure that you and your coworkers are adequately protected. The program administrator will know a lot about your workplace respiratory protection program and should be able to answer any questions you may have about respirator use. The program administrator must know about the requirements of the OSHA Respiratory Protection Standard and must periodically evaluate the program and make any necessary changes. This is a video about the different types of respirators that workers might use in their workplace. If your employer requires you to wear a respirator on the job, the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also called OSHA, and state OSHA agencies require that your employer select an appropriate respirator for you. A brief overview and general information about various types of respirators and some of your employer's responsibilities under OSHA's Respiratory Protection Standard will be discussed in this video. There are two main types of respirators: air purifying respirators, which use filters, cartridges, or canisters to remove contaminants from the air you breathe, and atmosphere supplying respirators, which provide you with clean air from an uncontaminated source. Respirators can also be classified as tight-fitting or loose-fitting. Tight-fitting respirators need a tight seal between the respirator and the face and/or neck of the respirator user in order to work properly. If the respirator's seal leaks, contaminated air will be pulled into the facepiece and can be breathed in. Therefore, anything that interferes with the respirator seal is not permitted when using this type of respirator. This could include facial hair, earrings, headscarves, wigs, and facial piercings. If you are required to use a tight-fitting respirator at work, you must be fit tested with the respirator selected for your use. Fit testing is done to be sure that the respirator's facepiece fits your face. You must be fit tested before you use your respirator for the first time. You must also be retested at least every 12 months to be sure that your respirator continues to fit your face. A fit test should not be confused with a user seal check. A user seal check is a quick check performed by the wearer each time the respirator is put on. It determines if the respirator is properly seated to the face or needs to be readjusted. Loose-fitting respirators do not depend on a tight seal with the face to provide protection. Therefore, they do not need to be fit tested. Your employer is responsible for selecting appropriate respirators to protect you from airborne hazards. To ensure that the correct respirator is selected, your employer must consider a number of factors. First, your employer must identify and evaluate the hazard. Your respirator will need different types of filters, cartridges, or canisters depending on the type and amount of airborne contaminant in your workplace. It is your employer's responsibility to determine which filter, cartridge, or canister is necessary and how often it needs to be changed. For example, respirators that have particulate filters will not protect you against gases, vapors, and the non-particulate components of fumes, mists, fogs, smoke, and sprays. Your employer must also determine if the work atmosphere lacks sufficient oxygen. That is, if it is oxygen deficient or is contaminated to the point of being immediately dangerous to life or health. This is also referred to as IDLH. Only atmosphere-supplying respirators, such as an airline respirator or a self-contained breathing apparatus, also known as an SCBA, can be used in IDLH atmospheres. Once your employer has identified the type and amount of airborne contaminant present in your workplace, your employer will use this information to see how much protection you need the respirator to provide to you. Different types of respirators offer different levels of protection. The measure of a respirator's protection capability is called the Assigned Protection Factor, or APF. This is a number that OSHA has assigned to each class of respirators. It represents the level of protection from airborne exposure each class of respirators is expected to provide. The larger the number, the greater the level of protection. For example, when used properly, a respirator with an APF of 10 will reduce your exposure to 1/10 the concentration of the contaminant in the air. Similarly, a respirator with an APF of 50 will reduce your exposure to 1/50th the concentration of the contaminant in the air. OSHA's APFs can be found in Table 1 of its Respiratory Protection Standard. When selecting an appropriate respirator, your employer must also consider whether the hazard has any additional characteristics that may affect the type of respirator selected. For example, does the hazard irritate the eyes? Do you need splash and spray protection as well as eye protection? If so, you will need a full face piece respirator or some type of eye protection. Let's take a closer look at the different types of respirators that are available to protect you. There are advantages and disadvantages to each type of respirator, so it's important that your employer select the type that's best suited for your work setting and the hazards you face. These are filtering face piece half-mask respirators, sometimes referred to as N95s. A filtering face piece respirator covers the nose and mouth and is a tight-fitting air purifying respirator in which the whole face piece functions as the filter. Filtering face pieces may or may not have an exhalation valve to help exhaled breath exit the face piece. They need to be fit tested unless you are wearing them under voluntary use conditions. Filtering face piece respirators filter out particles and do not protect against non-particulate hazards such as gases or vapors. This is a half-face piece elastomeric respirator. It is a tight-fitting air purifying respirator with replaceable filters for particulates or cartridges or canisters for gases and vapors. In either case, these are attached to a rubber or silicone face piece that covers the nose and mouth. This type of respirator needs to be fit tested and can be used instead of a filtering face piece respirator. An elastomeric half-face piece respirator can be cleaned, decontaminated, and reused. This is not the case for a filtering face piece respirator, which is normally discarded after use. Like filtering face pieces, half-face piece elastomeric respirators can be used for particulates, but they can also be used for many gases and vapors if equipped with the proper cartridges. This is a full face piece elastomeric respirator. This type of respirator provides a higher level of protection than a half face piece respirator because it has better sealing characteristics. Since it covers the user's eyes and face, it can also be used to protect against liquid splashes and irritating vapors. Like the half-mask elastomeric respirator, this respirator is a tight-fitting, air-purifying respirator with replaceable filters or cartridges attached to a rubber or silicone facepiece. It needs to be fit-tested. This is a loose-fitting facepiece powered air-purifying respirator, or PAPR. A PAPR has a blower that pulls air through attached filters. The blower then pushes the filtered air into the facepiece, which covers all of the user's face. Since it is loose-fitting, it does not need to be fit-tested and can be used by workers with facial hair. Another type of PAPR is the tight-fitting full-face piece PAPR. This PAPR has an elastomeric facepiece made of rubber or silicone. It has filters and a blower that operate as they do on a loose-fitting facepiece PAPR. Because this PAPR has a tight-fitting facepiece, it must be fit-tested. There are also half-mask PAPRs, as well as PAPRs that have a helmet or hood. This is an airline respirator. It supplies clean breathing air to either a hood or a facepiece through a long hose from a source of clean air, such as a cylinder or compressor. If the facepiece is tight-fitting, it must be fit-tested. This is a self-contained breathing apparatus, or SCBA. It is a type of atmosphere-supplying respirator. SCBAs have a tight-fitting elastomeric facepiece that covers the user's face. The air is supplied from a cylinder of compressed breathing air that is designed to be carried by the respirator user. The facepiece is tight-fitting and must be fit-tested. As its name implies, this respirator is truly self-contained. These respirators provide the highest level of respiratory protection. You may hear someone refer to a respirator as an N95 or a P100. While most people use the term N95 to refer to filtering facepiece respirators, N95 actually describes the type of filter material and its protective properties. The filter material can be used in either a filtering facepiece respirator or in a filter cartridge that's attached to an elastomeric respirator. The first part of the filter's classification uses the letters N, R, or P to indicate the filter's ability to function when exposed to oils. N means not resistant to oil. R means somewhat resistant to oil. And P means strongly resistant to oil or oil-proof. This rating is only important in work settings where oils may be present, because some oils can reduce the effectiveness of the filter. The second part of the classification, the number, refers to the filter's ability to remove the most penetrating particle size during worst-case testing. Filters that remove at least 95% of these particles are given a 95 rating. Those that filter out at least 99% receive a 99 rating. And those that filter out at least 99.97%, essentially 100%, receive a 100 rating. Using this classification method, an N95 filter is not resistant to oil and removes at least 95% of the most penetrating particles. If you use a PAPR, the high-efficiency particulate air filter, or HEPA filter, that is attached to your unit, is similar to a P100 filter. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH, tests different respirator models in its laboratory to make sure they meet certain minimum performance standards. To become NIOSH certified, respirators must pass the performance tests listed in NIOSH's regulations. For example, NIOSH tests the filter efficiency of the filter materials used in a respirator. When respiratory protection is required, employers must provide NIOSH-certified respirators to their workers. To see if your respirator is NIOSH certified, look for the NIOSH logo, as well as the Test and Certification Approval Number, or TC number. The logo and TC number can be found on the respirator's package or the user instruction insert, and sometimes they appear directly on respirator components, such as the respirator filter or cartridge. If your respirator is not NIOSH certified, do not use it in a hazardous area. You must never alter your respirator. Doing so can reduce its protective quality and expose you to the airborne hazard. Never glue or staple things to your respirator. Do not write on your respirator's filter material, and never put holes in your respirator. However, it is okay to write your name on your respirator straps. You must never use unapproved parts on your respirator. A user seal check must be performed each time you put on a respirator to check that it has been donned correctly. Remember, always follow the respirator manufacturer's instructions for the specific respirator model that you are using. Here are some general instructions for properly donning and doffing and properly conducting a user seal check for the two most common types of respirators. Let's begin with general instructions for a disposable filtering facepiece respirator, which is often referred to as an N95 or a dust mask. Inspect the respirator, including the straps, for tears or damage. If you find any damage to the respirator, replace it. If your respirator comes out of its original container folded flat, open the folds fully, following the manufacturer's instructions. Using one hand, place the respirator on your face with the nose piece at your fingertips, allowing the headbands to hang freely. The nose piece should span and cover the bridge of your nose, and the respirator should cup your chin. Pull the top strap over your head, resting it high at the back of your head. Pull the bottom strap over your head and position it around your neck and below your ears. Be sure not to crisscross the straps. Make sure that your mouth and nose are covered by the respirator. If the nose piece has a metal nose piece or strip, use both hands to mold the nose strip to conform to the shape of your nose by pushing inward while moving your fingertips down along both sides of the nose piece. Next, conduct a user seal check. It's essential to follow the manufacturer's user seal check instructions because the manufacturer knows the best method for checking their respirator. Generally speaking, the manufacturer's instructions are based on covering the surface of the respirator, usually with your hands, so that air is prevented from passing through the filtering facepiece. A positive pressure seal check is performed by gently exhaling to see if the facepiece bulges slightly. For a negative pressure seal check, take a quick deep breath to see if the facepiece collapses slightly. During either test, if air leaks out between your face and the respirator's face seal, the respirator may not fit your face properly. One way that you can identify leakage is if you feel air blowing through the seal onto your face or eyes. If you feel leakage, readjust the fit of your respirator and check the seal again. If you cannot achieve a proper seal, you are not protected and should not enter a hazardous area. See your supervisor to determine what the problem may be. When you're finished wearing the respirator, carefully remove it without touching the exterior, because the exterior may be contaminated. Discard your respirator according to your company's procedures. Now let's explore the general instructions for properly donning and doffing and properly conducting a user seal check for a half facepiece elastomeric respirator, sometimes referred to as a half mask. Remember, these are just general instructions. You should always follow the manufacturer's instructions for the specific respirator model that you are using. To begin, inspect the respirator, including the straps, valves, and gaskets, for loose, missing, or damaged parts. If you find any damage to the respirator, repair or replace it. Then pull the bottom strap over your head. Place the respirator facepiece under your chin and over your nose, with the narrow part of the facepiece over your nose. Pull the head harness over the crown of your head and adjust its placement until it is stable but comfortable. Be sure that the neck strap is flat and smooth against the back of your neck. Adjust the neck strap, but be careful not to over-tighten the respirator to your face. Next, perform a positive pressure user seal check. Place the palm of your hand over the exhalation valve outlet. Do not push so hard that you distort the natural shape of the facepiece. Exhale gently and hold your breath to create and maintain a slight positive pressure inside the facepiece. If the facepiece bulges slightly and no air leaks are detected between your face and the facepiece, a proper fit has been achieved. If, on the other hand, you detect a face seal leakage, reposition the facepiece and readjust the straps, and then retest. If you cannot achieve a proper seal, you are not protected and should not enter a hazardous area. See your supervisor to determine what the problem may be. Next, perform the negative pressure seal check. Cover the respirator cartridges or filters with the palms of your hands. Inhale gently. If you feel the facepiece collapse slightly and pull closer to your face with no leaks between the face and facepiece, a proper seal has been made. If you detect face seal air leakage, reposition the respirator on your face and readjust the straps, then recheck. If you cannot achieve a proper seal, you are not protected and should not enter a hazardous area. See your supervisor to determine what the problem may be. When you have finished wearing the respirator, carefully remove it by loosening the straps and taking it off without touching the cartridges or filters, because they may be contaminated. This is a video about respirator maintenance and care requirements for any worker who wears a respirator. The Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also called OSHA, and state OSHA agencies require employers to have a respiratory protection program that includes provisions for the cleaning, disinfecting, inspection, repair, and storage of respirators used by workers on the job. While this video discusses some of your employer's responsibilities under OSHA's Respiratory Protection Standard, it is important to remember that your respirator must be properly maintained so that it can protect you. Respirators are not maintenance-free. OSHA's Respiratory Protection Standard requires your employer to have a respiratory protection program. The program must provide for the cleaning, disinfecting, inspection, repair, and storage of each type of respirator used in your workplace. This includes respirators used in emergency situations, for emergency escape, and self-contained breathing apparatuses. In addition, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, also called NIOSH, requires each respirator manufacturer to include a section in their user instructions that provides the recommended practices for maintenance and care of the respirator. Your employer must ensure that the respirator you use is clean, sanitary, and in good working order. Cleaning and disinfecting must be done using either the procedures in OSHA's Respiratory Protection Standard or the procedures recommended by the respirator manufacturer, provided they are at least as effective as OSHA's. The manufacturer's procedures should always be checked to see if certain cleaners or disinfectants might damage the respirator and should not be used. If this is the case, the manufacturer's instructions must be followed. In general, cleaning and disinfecting consists of taking the respirator apart, washing it, disinfecting it, thoroughly rinsing it, and putting it back together when it is dry. Respirators must be cleaned as often as necessary to prevent them from becoming unsanitary. In addition, respirators worn by more than one user must be cleaned and disinfected before being worn by a different user. And emergency use respirators must be cleaned and disinfected after each use. While filtering facepiece respirators cannot be cleaned or disinfected, it is still important that you inspect them for cleanliness and damage before each use. All respirators must be inspected for basic function before each use and during the cleaning and disinfecting process. A respirator inspection must include a check of the respirator's ability to work properly, the tightness of any connections, and the condition of the various parts, such as the facepiece, head straps, valves, tubes, hoses, and any cartridges, canisters, or filters. In addition, elastomeric parts must be checked for pliability and signs of deterioration. Regular care and maintenance of the respirator is important to be sure that it works properly. If your respirator fails an inspection or is defective, your employer must remove it from service and either repair it or discard it. Repairs or adjustments must be made only by appropriately trained people. In addition, repairs must be made according to the respirator manufacturer's instructions and must use only NIOSH-approved parts that are designed for the respirator. It is important for respirators to be stored properly to protect them from damage, contamination, dust, sunlight, extreme temperatures, excessive moisture, and damaging chemicals. Never leave your respirator hanging on a machine, lying on your workbench, or tossed into your toolbox or a drawer. Always store your respirator in a way that prevents deforming the facepiece or exhalation valve. Avoid carrying a cup-shaped filtering facepiece respirator in your pocket or toolbox. This could crush it and cause the facepiece to be bent out of shape, preventing the respirator from sealing tightly to your face and properly protecting you. Air purifying respirators use a filter or cartridge to remove hazards from the air you breathe. A properly functioning air purifying respirator can provide effective protection for as long as the filters or cartridges work correctly. For respirators that use filters to clean the air, the filters must be replaced whenever they are damaged, soiled, or cause noticeably increased breathing resistance. Before each use, the outside of the filter material must be inspected. If the filter material is physically damaged or soiled, the filter must be replaced, or in the case of a filtering facepiece respirator, the respirator must be discarded. Filtering facepiece respirators can be reused by the same worker, but only if the respirator is working properly, its shape remains unchanged, and the filter material is not physically damaged or soiled. Of course, there may be reasons for disposing of a filtering facepiece respirator that still appears to be functional. Your employer must identify the circumstances in which a filtering facepiece respirator will be considered to be contaminated, unsanitary, or otherwise not able to be reused so that you can recognize when a new respirator is needed. Some gas and vapor hazards require the use of respirator cartridges or canisters containing materials that absorb or remove these hazards from the air. However, cartridges or canisters can only absorb a limited amount of hazardous gas or vapor. To ensure your protection, they must be replaced before they reach this limit. If you use a respirator for protection against gases and vapors, your employer must determine a schedule for replacing worn-out cartridges or canisters. This is known as a change-out schedule. Your employer is responsible for providing this information to you so you know when a cartridge or canister must be changed. Remember, never rely on your ability to smell a contaminant as the sole basis for determining when your cartridge or canister must be changed. If you do smell a contaminant while wearing your respirator, leave the area and notify your supervisor immediately. A respirator can't protect you if it doesn't fit your face. It's that simple. Certain respirators, known as tight-fitting respirators, must form a tight seal with your face or neck to work properly. If your respirator doesn't fit your face properly, contaminated air can leak into your respirator facepiece, and you could breathe in hazardous substances. So before you wear a tight-fitting respirator at work, your employer must be sure that your respirator fits you. Your employer does this by performing a fit test on you while you wear the same make, model, and size of respirator that you will be using on the job. That way, you know that your respirator fits you properly and can protect you as long as you use it correctly. In addition, before you use a respirator or are fit tested, your employer must ensure that you are medically able to wear it. So, what is a fit test? A fit test tests the seal between the respirator's facepiece and your face. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes to complete and is performed at least annually. After passing a fit test with a respirator, you must use the exact same make, model, style, and size respirator on the job. A fit test should not be confused with a user seal check. A user seal check is a quick check performed by the wearer each time the respirator is put on. It determines if the respirator is properly seated to the face or needs to be readjusted. There are two types of fit tests: qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative fit testing is a pass-fail test method that uses your sense of taste or smell or your reaction to an irritant in order to detect leakage into the respirator facepiece. Qualitative fit testing does not measure the actual amount of leakage. Whether the respirator passes or fails the test is based simply on you detecting leakage of the test substance into your facepiece. There are 4 qualitative fit test methods accepted by OSHA. Isoamyl acetate, which smells like bananas. Saccharin, which leaves a sweet taste in your mouth. Bitrex, which leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. And irritant smoke, which can cause coughing. Qualitative fit testing is normally used for half-mask respirators, those that just cover your mouth and nose. Half-mask respirators can be filtering facepiece respirators, often called N95s, as well as elastomeric respirators. Quantitative fit testing uses a machine to measure the actual amount of leakage into the facepiece and does not rely upon your sense of taste, smell, or irritation in order to detect leakage. The respirators used during this type of fit testing will have a probe attached to the facepiece that will be connected to the machine by a hose. There are 3 quantitative fit test methods accepted by OSHA: generated aerosol, ambient aerosol, and controlled negative pressure. Quantitative fit testing can be used for any type of tight-fitting respirator. Many workers need to wear prescription glasses or personal protective equipment, such as safety goggles or earmuffs, while performing a job. If you fall into this category, then you must wear these items during the fit test to be sure they don't interfere with the respirator's fit. You must be fit tested before you use a respirator in the workplace, and you must be retested at least every 12 months to make sure that the respirator you use still fits you. You must be fit tested with the specific make, model, style, and size of respirator that you will be using. Not everyone can get a good fit with one specific respirator. If the respirator fails the fit test, then another make, model, style, or size must be tried until one is found that fits you properly. Therefore, your employer needs to provide you with a reasonable selection of sizes and models to choose from. When you've completed the fit testing process, it's very important that you know which make, model, style, and size respirator fits your face properly, and when and where you'll need to wear it for protection. Also, the fit of your respirator must be retested whenever you have a change in your physical condition that could affect the fit of your respirator. Such changes could include large weight gain or loss, major dental work, such as new dentures, facial surgery that may have changed the shape of your face, or significant scarring in the area of the seal. Any of these changes could affect the ability of your respirator to properly seal to your face, which could allow contaminated air to leak into your respirator facepiece. If you find that the fit of your respirator becomes unacceptable, you must be allowed to select a different type of respirator and be retested. The selection may include a new make, model, style, or size of respirator. Facial hair, like a beard or mustache, can affect your respirator's ability to protect you. Anything that comes between your face and the respirator's seal or gets into the respirator's valves can allow contaminated air to leak into the respirator facepiece, and you will not be protected. For example, if you have long hair, make sure it doesn't get between the respirator seal and your face, because this can allow contaminated air to leak into the respirator. Fit testing can be done by your employer or an outside party, including a union, an apprenticeship program, a contractors association, or a past employer. Your current employer is permitted to accept fit testing you have received from an outside party, such as a former employer, within the last 12 months, as long as you use the same respirator make, model, style, and size at your new work site. This is known as fit testing portability. While recent fit testing can follow you from job to job, it is still your current employer's responsibility to ensure that the fit testing and record-keeping requirements of OSHA's respiratory protection standard have been met before you use a respirator for protection against hazardous exposures at work. Sometimes workers own their own respirators and bring them to a job where respiratory protection is required. If your employer allows you to use your own personal respirator for protection, then your employer still has to comply with all of the requirements of the OSHA standard. For example, your employer must still ensure that your respirator is appropriate for the hazards you face, your respirator is properly cleaned, maintained, and stored, and the proper schedule for replacing cartridges and filters is followed. Keep in mind, however, that while your employer may allow you to use your own respirator, your employer cannot require you to use your own respirator. This video is about the voluntary use of respirators in the workplace. Even though respirator use is not required in these situations, the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also called OSHA, and state OSHA agencies require employers to meet certain obligations for workers who voluntarily wear respirators on the job. This video discusses some of your employer's responsibilities under OSHA's Respiratory Protection Voluntary Use Requirements. Most workers who wear respirators use them because they are required to do so by their employer to protect them from airborne hazards. However, there are some situations where you may want to wear a respirator even though respirator use is not required by your employer or an OSHA standard. For example, you might request to wear a respirator to avoid exposure to an airborne hazard, even if the amount of the hazardous substance does not exceed the limits set by OSHA standards. Another example where you might want to voluntarily use a respirator would be to reduce exposure and increase comfort when working in a non-hazardous but dusty situation. For example, sweeping a shop floor. If your employer permits you to wear a respirator where it is not required, it is considered voluntary respirator use. Before you can voluntarily use a respirator, your employer must ensure that its use does not present a health hazard to you. To do this, your employer must implement certain elements of a written respiratory protection program necessary to ensure that any worker using a respirator voluntarily is medically able to use that respirator. In addition, your employer must ensure that the respirator is properly cleaned, stored, and maintained so that its use does not present a health hazard to you. However, employers do not have to develop and implement a written respiratory protection program when workers only use filtering face-piece respirators voluntarily. If you will be voluntarily using a respirator, your employer is also required to provide you with a copy of Appendix D of OSHA's Respiratory Protection Standard or the equivalent state OSHA agency document. This document contains certain precautions you should take when wearing a respirator voluntarily. In general, Appendix D advises you to read and follow the manufacturer's instructions provided with the respirator. These instructions include information on how to properly use, maintain, and care for the respirator, along with warnings on the capabilities and limitations of the respirator. To choose respirators that have been certified by NIOSH for protection against the contaminant of concern, to keep track of your respirator so that you do not use someone else's respirator by mistake, and not to wear your respirator in areas with contaminants that the respirator is not designed to protect against. For example, remember that a particulate respirator does not protect you against gases, vapors, and the non-particulate components of fumes, mists, fogs, smoke, and sprays. Remember, voluntary use is only permitted when your employer has determined that there is no airborne hazard that would require the use of a respirator. This video has provided you with a brief overview of OSHA's voluntary use requirements for respirators. Remember, if you don't know if a respirator is required for the task you will be doing, talk to your supervisor before entering the work area.